Why was Kemba Walker taken out of the rotation? Let's get into this.
Dosage. Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetics.
Quickly before we get the video started, if you guys enjoy this video and want to see more NBA content just like this one, hit that subscribe button and that post notification bell. Anyways, back to the video. Last season for the New York Knicks was an absolute fantastic year. Not only was it a great year, but it was a very surprising year. Going into last year, nobody expected the Knicks to be any better than maybe a 10th or 11th seed in the Eastern Conference. But not only did the Knicks make it to the playoffs, they made it all the way up to the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference and certainly had a chance going into the playoffs to at the very least win a round or win a few games in the first round. Unfortunately, it didn't go the way they would have liked, but either way, based on the expectations they had going into this season, last year for the Knicks was certainly a very successful season for them. But going into this season, the expectations for the Knicks were way higher than they were last year, and now the expectations are basically make it to the playoffs again, and once you get to the playoffs, actually win a playoff series and then see what you can do going from there. And so far early on in this season for the Knicks, they certainly had some great moments, and overall they are above 500 and better than they were at this point last year, but there have been some disappointing moments for the Knicks this year, and they don't look as good as a lot of people expected them to, including myself going into this season. Talking about collectively as a unit, some of the issues that the Knicks have this year compared to last, probably one of the bigger issues the Knicks have currently is their offense. Specifically, the starting lineup offensively just does not look all that comfortable out there, and overall just does not appear to me that they're playing as a unit. Talking about a guy specifically like Julius Randle, who was certainly the main guy on the Knicks last year and looked very comfortable with the ball in his hands and just scoring basically at will, this season he looks a lot more uncomfortable. There's been a ton of times this season where Julius just looks very passive out there and doesn't feel very comfortable to get to his spots and just put up some shots. It's pretty clear that for whatever reason, maybe because there's some new players on the team and their chemistry isn't all that great yet, but for whatever reason a guy like Julius just isn't asserting himself as much as he was last season, and I think that's certainly hurting the Knicks offensively. But besides just Julius, just overall RJ Barrett as well, Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier, the new guys, everyone just looks very uncomfortable out there, at least in the starting lineup. Off the bench it's certainly a lot better. But another issue that the Knicks face collectively as a unit this year is their defense. So last year the main reason why the Knicks were so good and so impressive was mostly due to their defense, under head coach Tom Thibodeau of course. But this season the Knicks clearly have the same caliber of defenders for the most part. They lost a few great defenders in Reggie Bullock, but overall the Knicks definitely have some great individual defenders still on this team, but the issue is they're not as consistent as they were last year. There's times where the Knicks show their great defensive ability from time to time where they just have some possessions consecutively that they just play fantastic defense, but the issue with them is they're not as consistent, and there's been a ton of times where the Knicks overall just don't play good defense whatsoever and they kind of just give up on the play and have some miscommunications defensively, just giving up simple stuff, giving up a backdoor cut to the basket for a wide open dunk or layup, giving up a wide open corner 3-point shot. That's something they've been giving up a ton this season, and overall just a ton of miscommunications, and once again just not great chemistry out there on the defensive side, and just don't look comfortable out there is the best way I can describe it. And it's pretty clear at this point that the Knicks certainly have some problems that they need to address and make some changes. And just recently head coach Tom Thibodeau actually made a pretty major change. He announced today that Kemba Walker is not only not going to be in the starting lineup anymore, but he's actually going to be out of the rotation. And on the outside looking in, you might say that sounds kind of crazy, because yeah, Kemba Walker is certainly injury prone and he's not the same player he was previous, but either way he still has that scoring ability and he's still a very good player at this point in his career. And even looking at some of the numbers that Kemba's putting up this year, they are pretty good numbers, but when you actually watch Kemba play out there, it's pretty clear that there's some issues with his game. So clearly the biggest issue within Kemba's game, and something that really has gotten a lot worse as of late ever since he's been going through these knee injuries, is his defensive ability. Just naturally at that 6-foot size, a guy like Kemba is going to struggle a lot more than somebody else that's obviously a bigger size. Unless you just had incredible defensive skill at that 6-foot size, maybe you can get away with it, but unfortunately Kemba doesn't have that. And as of late, specifically on the Celtics as of late, and specifically on the Knicks currently, whatever player is being guarded by Kemba would just expose Kemba and take him him all the way to the basket and get some easy dunks or layups. And when you have a player on your team that's a liability defensively, of course it really hurts your defense overall, and certainly that has been something we've been seeing with the Knicks. But a question that you may ask is, Kemba basically throughout his whole NBA career was always a pretty bad defender, and it was always seen as such, which is 100% true, but how come in the past Kemba was not only seen as playable, but he was seen as a superstar type player, and now currently on the Knicks, and basically with the Celtics as well, he was seen as a guy who's not playable? Well, the biggest change with Kemba between his Hornets days and fast forwarding to his days now with the Knicks is he's not as effective on the offensive side. The big reason why Kemba was seen as such a great player in the past, although he was certainly not a good defender whatsoever, was he was so good offensively that it made up for his defensive lapses. But the issue now is his offensive game is just not nearly as good as it used to be. Of course, it's definitely accelerated by the knee injuries that he's been dealing with, and maybe it also could be due to age as well. But his offensive ability now is certainly good. I'm not going to say it's bad, but his offense just isn't good enough to really overcome his defensive lapses like it was in the past. And I think that's the biggest issue with Kemba. And of course, offensively, Kemba is still very talented. He has the ability to shoot that three-point shot. Not only has an ability, but is actually a very good three-point shooter. Currently, early on in the season, he's shooting 45% from deep, which is just crazy. He also clearly has the ability to shoot that mid-range jump shot, could run the pick and roll a little bit. Not a great passer, but could run the pick and roll a little bit. Has a really good mid-range jump shot to come off that pick and roll, although I will say also has the ability to finish around the basket. But the issue with Kemba offensively is he still has all those abilities and is still a 3-level scorer like he was in the past, but the issue is he's just not as dominant as he was in the past, and at this point it's difficult to put him in the starting lineup. But to really show why the Knicks pulled Kemba out of the rotation and really show how bad it's gotten early on in the season between the Knicks and Kemba, there's this crazy stat out that in terms of the defensive rating, when Kemba is on the court, the Knicks are dead last in terms of defensive rating. But when Kemba's not on the court, the Knicks are literally number one in terms of defensive rating. That's a complete flip and really shows you how dramatic of a difference it is defensively with Kemba on as opposed to off the court. And I feel like that's a good enough reason to pull him at the very least from the starting lineup and maybe even from the rotation. But another stat that I saw is in terms of their offensive rating, when Kemba Walker's on the court, the Knicks are 27th, but once he's off the court, they're 9th. So it's pretty clear that both offensively and defensively, there's a dramatic change when Kemba is on compared to off the court. And basically, I think that's the only stat you really need to describe why the Knicks made this move. And in my opinion, when I was actually watching Kemba on the Knicks, I thought he was playing decently well. He was certainly offensively showed the ability to hit a three-point shot at a high percentage. He was playing decently in the pick and roll in terms of his own scoring ability, pulling up from those mid-range jump shots. I thought he was a little inconsistent finishing around the basket, but he clearly showed the ability to do so. And coming off when we had Elfrid Payton starting at point guard last year, I didn't necessarily see Kemba as that bad of a player for the Knicks this year. But just seeing that stat that I just mentioned specifically, I think that really shows how bad it's gotten. And in my opinion, I don't have any problem with the Knicks taking him out of the rotation based on that stat. Now, of course, the argument could be made that it still is very early on in the season and maybe that stat is a little unfair, and I probably would agree with that to an extent, although it certainly raises a pretty bad red flag about Kemba Walker and the Knicks. But going forward, my expectation, what will happen is maybe Kemba won't play for a few more games, maybe the Knicks will play well, maybe they won't, we'll see what happens. But I think eventually, no matter what happens, Thibodeau will allow Kemba to come back into the rotation at some point. Maybe get some minutes coming off the bench and see if he could play better with the bench unit. If not, maybe they'll trade him eventually or release him. Or if he starts to play well, maybe he'll get some more minutes with that unit, and maybe you start a guy like Alec Burks, who they're going with currently, or maybe D Rose when he comes back. We'll see what happens. But that's probably my expectation for what will happen. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think it was the right move to take Kemba completely out of the rotation, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, please leave a like and subscribe and hit that post notification bell. It really helps me out a lot. Until the next time, peace out, guys.
Dosage. Oh yeah, I work with the medics. I'm about to get you injected. I got a couple connections so I can get you prosthetics. Hope you can't go where I'm headed.